Please join me in welcoming Senator Roy Blunt to the Heritage podium.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for you and Heritage hosting this discussion today on religious liberty. I'm pleased to be here, and this topic, I think, is one of our nation's first and most fundamental freedoms. In fact, just 4 months before he became president, George Washington assured the Quakers, who were concerned about their religious liberty, that the law may always be as extensively accommodated to them as due regard for the protection and essential interest of the nation may justify and permit. And then Mike mentioned something that we actually use this in the introduction to our legislation when we filed it, and it's in the legislation, the 1809 Jefferson letter to London, the New London Methodist, where he says, "No provision of our Constitution ought to be dearer to man than that which protects the rights of conscience against the enterprises of civil authority." No provision of our Constitution ought to be dearer to man than that which protects the rights of conscience against the enterprises of the civil authority. Both Washington's statement and Jefferson's statement convey conviction for religious freedom that's deeply embedded in who we are, a freedom that frankly has defined the United States for over 2 centuries as much as any other freedom we possess to uphold and to hold dear. Unfortunately, my view is that the current administration seems to have taken a very different approach to this freedom. In February of 2011, the Obama administration repealed rules that had been put in place to protect the rights of medical professionals in federally funded facilities not to be part of health care that they had a faith-based objection to. Without these protections, repealed by the Obama administration, doctors, nurses, and other medical staff could be forced now to perform procedures that they oppose on moral grounds. In August of 2011, the Obama administration took this attack on conscience protections a step further by mandating that all insurance companies and employers cover contraception and controversial abortion drugs with no copay. This very same month, Senator Nelson of Nebraska and I, along with Senator Ayotte and Rubio, filed the Respect for the Rights of Conscience Act. This same legislation was introduced in the House by Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. The bill mentions no specific religious guarantee. Christian Scientists and Catholics have no greater protection than Methodists or Muslims. The faith-based beliefs of Judaism and Islam are equally protected in the bill that we would like to see enforce the First Amendment to the Constitution. To implement the rule that the President issued in August of last year, the Department of Health and Human Services decided that the church itself could be exempted and that faith-based organizations would have 12 months to adjust their beliefs to the new mandate. In fact, I think there are 2 big problems here. One is the belief that the work of the church somehow is confined in the 4 walls of the church house. If faith-based institutions aren't allowed to extend their principles in their various faith pursuits, then they're no longer faith-based institutions. I may get back to that in a little bit, but the other thing I think is particularly objectionable is the idea that we know this is a big problem for you based on your personal belief system, so we're giving you a year to figure out how to deal with it. If your personal belief system is that flexible, it must not actually be a personal belief system. There was a great deal of pressure from both sides of the aisle, most importantly from America's faith-based community. And then President Obama last week announced what he called a compromise, which I don't see how you could see it as anything but more of the same. With his remarks last week, the President made it clear he still doesn't understand that this mandate is not about cost. It's about who controls the religious views of faith-based institutions. If this is not a financial consideration. If you're opposed to something because it costs money, that's different than being opposed to it because you have a moral objection to it or a faith-based objection to it. If it doesn't cost you anything, you should no longer be offended by it. Now, is this about cost or is this about control? The Constitution at its core makes it clear that faith-based principles are to be protected. They're not to be ameliorated by saying somebody else is going to pay the bill. You just have to be part of the process. And as its core, the debate surrounding the president's health care law creates these problems, as we all knew it would. If you're going to run health care, if you're going to mandate something as personal as health care, it's very difficult not to expand that mandate into the area of faith-based views. This is about who we're going to be as a nation. Are we going to be like everybody else that really does believe that the government can decide who your doctor is going to be and where you live when you're old and where your kids go to school and what procedures are appropriate for you? Are we going to continue to have those decisions that are made between people and their health care provider, between the patient and the doctor, between the health care system that you choose to go to for the health care you hope to receive? The president, I think, seems to look at this and other issues as if America is somehow just like everybody else. And frankly, I think that's the big debate of this election year. Are we just going to be everybody else? Are we going to continue to be distinctively and defiantly different from the world norm of what governments can and can't do, because our government is controlled by the people rather than the people being controlled by the government. A lot of faith-based groups from the very start have said we need the same kind of protection from mandates now in health care that we've traditionally had in other areas. This isn't just a Catholic issue. It's not about one group. It's about ensuring that we continue to have the fundamental right to religious freedom in our country. Just because you come up with an accounting gimmick and pretend like religious institutions don't have to pay for a mandate, and by the way, I think when you really bore into that, it makes no sense at all. Somebody has to pay. Certainly if you're like many of these institutions and you're self-insured, it's all about the experience. Your pay is all based on the experience of your group as some insurance company manages that institutional group. And the costs are reflected by the services that are provided. And saying the insurance company pays is like saying that the utility company somehow absorbs all of the extra cost of your higher utility bill. We all know who pays the utility bill. You do. And we all know who pays the health insurance bill. It's in the case of these institutions, it's always going to be the employer. The idea that somehow this is mandated, it just misunderstands or maybe refuses to accept the fact that this is about faith, it's not about cost. The Respect for the Rights of Conscience Act currently has 37 co-sponsors. It's supported by all major groups who I believe are interested in this issue from a religious freedom perspective. The companion bill in the House has 172 co-sponsors. This bill is intentionally broad to ensure it addresses all current and future religious liberty issues created by the new possible mandates in the health care law. It protects health care providers and insurers, including purchasers such as small businesses, from being forced to violate their ethical principles to cover or fund products and services under the new health care law. The bill ensures that all Americans are protected against discrimination, penalty, or exclusion from the health care market for exercising their rights of conscience. Last week, I tried to introduce my bill as an amendment to the current work that's going to be before the Senate this week, the highway bill. Unfortunately, the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Reid, objected, calling the debate, his words, senseless, and urging Americans who are concerned about this issue to calm down. Now, Americans don't need to calm down. This is a debate that's as fundamental as the very First Amendment to the Constitution. We have a responsibility to protect the liberties that our government has ensured Americans. Our country has long recognized the distinctions of these faith-based institutions. Labor law is full of exceptions. The other place where we've traditionally had mandates is full of exceptions for institutions, and the courts have constantly recognized that faith-based institutions have a constitutional privilege to be treated differently. In fact, in the recent Supreme Court case, the Hosanna Tabor Academy, a Lutheran academy, the court reached a 9-0 decision on a constitutional principle. This is not a court that finds its way to a 9-0 decision that often, or with the kind of unanimity that the various opinions show, but 9-0 suggesting that all of the exceptions we've had in other mandates should be there and should be upheld. Now, for the first time, to repeat, the health care law takes us into a new world of mandates beyond labor law. And because of that, you need the Respect for the Rights of Conscience Act. The work of the church, the synagogue, the mosque cannot and should not be defined by the four walls of a building. The Christian school, the Jewish daycare center, the Islamic community center should be distinctive. If Christian schools or universities aren't able to express their faith views through the English teacher or the football coach, they really just become another school that happens to have a weekly chapel or a theology department. And the same exact principle needs to apply to faith-based institutions that deliver health care. The issue needs to be decided in a constitutional way by the legislature and the court, not by some regulation. And I'll continue to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to insist that eventually this constitutional protection be provided. We'll see if this Congress and this administration can get this job done, but the principle will not go away. The constitutional principle of freedom of religion and respect for rights of conscience has to prevail here, and I'm going to continue to work again with my colleagues, do everything I can to see that it does, and the debate is about what the debate is really about. We specifically did not mention individual things that had to be protected. What has to be protected here is the faith-based rights of conscience. And that's what this debate is about. Obviously, if you're on the other side and you don't want to argue the broad constitutional principle, you try to make the debate as narrow as you possibly can and change the subject. Well, let's not let that happen. Let's be sure that the subject continues to be the First Amendment to the Constitution, the inviolate principle in America of freedom of religion and freedom of faith-based institutions to provide the services and the impact on our society that they provide. And again, Mike, thanks to you and Heritage for wanting to take time today to talk about this topic. Thank you all.